Charles, why are you covered in mud right now?
First of all, this mud is actually a complex grouping of chemosynthetic, photosynthetic, and heterotrophic bacteria.
Ah, you must mean periphyton.
Yes, periphyton is a very important part of certain freshwater marsh ecosystems. I am delineating various wetland ecosystems for my current job. It's a very messy but important job.
Oh, that's really interesting. What is wetland delineation?
In order to protect Florida's wetlands, we need to first be able to identify them. Wetlands delineation is the process of mapping out wetlands, which is very important for conservation efforts.
Why is it important to conserve wetlands?
Well, wetlands have a number of ecosystem services such as water capture and purification. They also reduce flooding and erosion, all of which creates a stable ecosystem for native plants and animals, as well as any humans that are living around the wetlands.
So, since you were delineating wetlands, what kind of wetland were you in recently?
I was in a freshwater marsh.
What is a freshwater marsh?
A freshwater marsh is a type of wetland characterized by its emergent herbaceous vegetation. For a wetland to be considered a marsh, it must have less than 1/3 of its area covered by woody plants. A high water table ensures the ground is wet most of the year. Water that collects above ground must remain below 50 centimeters in depth, and water below ground must remain in the top 30 centimeters of the soil year-round. Several types of freshwater marshes are present within the state of Florida. The Florida Natural Areas Inventory divides the freshwater marshes into 6 categories. Basin marshes are large and in charge. These are typically the deepest form of marsh that can be encountered in the state. Basin marshes are filled by rainwater and thus depths vary seasonally. Though divorced from the fire-maintained communities that surround many other marshes, dry seasons allow for fires to occur on an infrequent basis. Peat is the primary substrate in these communities. The smaller, shallower cousin of basin marshes is the depression marsh. Occurring within fire-maintained communities, these round marshes have a sandy bottom and dry out seasonally with a potential for several-year dry spells. Wetland laws do not apply to this habitat, which is likely the reason these marshes feel so depressed. Many of the unique critters that live in depression marshes rely on the absence of fish and dragonfly larvae, which would otherwise predate them. Florida is netted with many beautiful rivers, which are the source of the next type of marsh. Floodplain marshes spend most of the year inundated, though depth is variable as the source of rivers swell and recede seasonally. The constant flowing water allows for higher oxygen content than many of Florida's other marshes, though peat is still able to accumulate above the sandy bottoms. Floodplain marshes exhibit considerable diversity due to their fluctuating depths. When the water levels recede, fish and other prey are concentrated in shallow pools, facilitating easy feeding by birds and mammals. Floodplain marshes have variable fire frequencies, which determine the ratio of shrubs to herbaceous plants. More frequent fire encourages the dominance of herbaceous plants, many of which can burn even during periods of flooding. Human influence has been especially damaging to this habitat and has led to extreme loss of diversity. Within marshes and swamps, there may exist sloughs. These are channels that are deeper than the surrounding wetland and facilitate drainage that would otherwise be absent or severely reduced. In a slough marsh, water may seem stagnant, but a weak flow is always present. Sloughs only dry out as a result of unusually long droughts. When the dry seasons permit, fire may occur, though in locations with long hydro periods or consistently high humidity, this might never happen. The deep peat deposits are reduced during burns, which is important in keeping the channels present and unobstructed. A slough marsh may only remain wet part of the year, usually around late summer through early fall at a bare minimum. The base of slough marshes is sand, but peat may form a shallow layer above this. And finally, a less diverse variety of slough marsh is the glade marsh. These are flooded longer than the slough marshes, with at least half the year being the minimum period of inundation. Rather than the sandy substrate of other slough marshes, glade marshes have deep peat deposits over a limestone and marl base.
In freshwater marshes, as well as many other wetland ecosystems, organic matter accumulates and creates a type of soil called peat. Peat provides many benefits for wetland communities and people. For one, peat is able to hold quite a bit of water. Because of this, peat is good at capturing and retaining water during the dry season. This keeps our wetlands wet and reduces fire in wetlands ecosystems. This is important because wetland species are adapted to this reduced fire frequency. Also, it is beneficial for us that peat can hold as much water as it can because it helps control and reduce flooding in human-populated areas. Peat is also important because it holds large amounts of carbon and nutrients. Mining peat releases this carbon into the air, expediting global warming. Peat mining also releases the nutrients stored in peat, causing the surrounding areas to be filled with excess nutrients. This change in available nutrients promotes eutrophication and colonization by invasive species. Despite these issues, peat mining continues because it is profitable, and it is up to consumers to determine whether it stays profitable. For this reason, it is important that consumers stop buying peat moss and potting soil, which also contains peat moss. Individuals can also make a difference by actively expressing their concerns regarding peat moss to local representatives.
Freshwater marshes are currently facing many issues regarding changes in species composition and introductions to invasive species. One of the most notable issues is the degradation of marl prairies. These prairies are inorganic marl soils with limestone close to the surface and are often very diverse communities. Marl prairies are being threatened by hydrological changes, a decrease in fire, and rock mining. The hydrological changes cause an increase in flooding, which in turn changes sawgrass marshes. A decrease in the fire frequency results in an increase in leaf litter, as well as the presence of plant species that are native to pine rocklands. Rock mining leads to the overall permanent loss of marl prairies. The Cape Sable seaside sparrow is an endangered species of bird facing many conservation concerns. As it stands now, there are only 2 populations left, one being in Everglades National Park and the other being in Big Cypress National Park. The sparrows prefer short hydroperiod marshes over marshes with long hydroperiods and have suffered because of hydrological changes that have been brought down by humans. Their preferred habitat is being lost at an alarming rate due to vegetation changes stemming from the alteration of fire and water flow, development, and hurricanes. In 2015, there was a lawsuit filed against the United States Army Corps of Engineers over the mismanagement of water and flooding of the sparrow's habitat. The Army Corps of Engineers was releasing large amounts of water during the dry season, changing the hydroperiod of sparrow habitats. The flooding also eliminated large areas of marl prairies, greatly decreasing the plant diversity of the area.
Wetlands have been shown to provide habitats for many species. They also provide flood protection. If wetland consists of 10% land, then there will be a 60% decrease in flooding. And if wetlands were to consist of 20% of the land, then there would be a 90% decrease in flooding. Instead of the water flowing into the sea, wetlands help with H2O capture, which is used to recharge aquifers and also used during drought. This ecosystem is also used to remove pollutants before entering other bodies of water, which help with H2O purification. With the reduction of fresh water release, this helps oysters to survive, seeing that too much fresh water kills them. Wetlands are also important because it not only helps with shoreline stabilization, it also helps decrease erosion. They have also been proven to be the first line of defense from storms near the ocean. Protecting and preserving wetlands are extremely important in today's society. There have been numerous local, regional, international environmental groups and government agencies that participate in the conservation efforts of wetlands. Some programs and initiatives include, but aren't limited to, monitoring climate changes, treatment of indigenous wildlife diseases, placing restrictions on water storage or construction near wetland areas. Some government agencies, along with nonprofit groups in specific locations, work with local authorities to monitor the effects of dams, along with other infrastructure projects on the surrounding wetlands. Overall, the main goal of wetland conservation is to ensure that wildlife and vegetation of a specific area have the resources readily available to sustain the ecosystem. Conservation efforts also ensure that any changes made to this ecosystem doesn't have a negative effect on the surrounding lands. A hydroelectric dam can block surface water runoff to the surrounding ecosystems. Wetlands can then dry up, which will result in vegetation drying along with the displacement of wildlife due to the lack of necessary surface water. A federal law that was put in place to protect wetlands is Section 404 of the Clean Water Act, which was used to restore and maintain the chemical, physical, and biological integrity of the nation's water.
Here are some things that you can do to improve wetlands near you. Do not drive off the road. This includes motorbikes and ATVs. Stop the use of fertilizers. Express your concerns to state and local representatives. Volunteer to help out locally with agencies and organizations. Tell a friend or a coworker about the importance of freshwater marshes. Find or create a local watershed association to support the conservation of your local wetlands.
In summary, there are many types of freshwater marshes with varying hydro periods, fire frequencies, subsurfaces, and water sources. These wetlands perform various ecosystem services such as carbon sequestration, flood and erosion control, fire modulation, and water capture and purification. For these reasons, it is important that we protect freshwater marshes.
This periphyton was produced by a complex aggregation of several thousand microscopic species. The photosynthesis was produced by diatoms, cyanobacteria, and algae. The heterotrophy was brought to you by invertebrates, protozoans, fungi, and bacteria. Special thanks to chemosynthetic organisms who, despite being poorly understood by the greater scientific community, are a key supporter of this cohesive unit.
No, the podcast.
Oh, the podcast. I thought you said periphyton. This podcast was produced by Noah Stefanik,
Kendra Cooper,
John Jager,
and Charles Charlie Reinecke.